Jessica Shurer is Center Coordinator and Clinical Social Worker of the Parkinson's Foundation Center of Excellence and the CurePSP Center of Care at UNC Chapel Hill. She received her Master of Social Work from UNC Chapel Hill in 2012. Ms. Shurer works with a team of movement disorder specialists to assess patient and care partner psychosocial needs, mood and coping, and provide short-term problem-solving, counseling, and connection to community resources. In addition, she works to grow a referral network of Parkinson's specialized clinicians across the state, coordinates 2 monthly specialty interdisciplinary clinics, facilitates 3 support groups, and organizes educational programs for patients and caregivers. Extra applause for the 3 support groups.
Do I use this or do I use this? I'm really short, so I could use either one. Oh, yeah, I guess so. I'll let you do it. While he's doing that, let's all take a moment and ground ourselves where we are right now. And also wake up just in between. Let's just all stretch. Seriously, like put your arms up, stretch it out, take a deep breath. Yes. I'm hearing the relaxation happening. Stretch it to the, whatever the side is. Other side. Don't hit your neighbor. All right, thanks. Because I needed that too. All right, good morning or afternoon. I don't even know what time it is anymore. So I had us do that little exercise just because you have so much information coming at you today, and it's such good information, but I also know that it can be really overwhelming because it's a lot to process. And so I just want to take a moment to, like I said, ground ourselves in this space and with this energy and these people around us right now, because all of that we'll figure out and you'll have time to process later. And it's also really easy, I know I do this, to think about, oh, I still need to run to Harris Teeter later and get stuff for dinner and pick up my kid from daycare and yada, yada, yada. And so right now, here we are. And I'm so grateful that you're all here today, because the thing is, with all of these talks and even with me being up here, you're all the experts in this. And I just want to remind you of that, because you're the ones, you're the boots on the ground, you're surviving, you're living through this day to day, and so I just have so much respect for the resilience in this room, and I just want to notice that. So clap for yourselves. Thank you. So I'm going to talk about kind of this, I was going to talk about discussing the diagnosis, and that's what I'll delve into, but I also wanted to make this a broader dialogue about having conversations that are important to happen, that are helpful in your day-to-day life with, like Dr. Browner and everyone's been saying, your family, your support network, and with your care providers, because so much of the adaptation and coping well with these diagnoses comes down to having that open and honest communication. So I'm going to get into that a little bit. And I also just want to give this disclaimer that I don't stand up here pretending like I know all of this. I had someone this morning ask me if I was 15 years old. I don't pretend that I'm this, wise person who knows everything about communication. I also acknowledge that sometimes when I talk about the importance of communication and having these conversations, I don't want to minimize how difficult they can be and how everybody has different experiences with all of this. And sometimes what I share can sound kind of trite or common sense because of that. So just, acknowledge that as we're going through this conversation are these things that resonate with me? Have I had this experience? Have I had different experiences? And then I want to open it up at the end to actually talk about that. So discussing the diagnosis, I think this is really important whether you're at the beginning of this journey or you've been in it for a number of years, because this probably comes up time and time again for many of you where you have to share this information with someone in your life, whether it's a loved one, a child, a doctor who's never heard of corticobasal degeneration before and you have to educate that doctor, or you're in a restaurant, you need to explain to someone why someone's acting a certain way or how you need assistance. But I also think that a lot of this starts at the time of diagnosis because you have to process that and then share that information with people. So why do we discuss the diagnosis? Why is this even important? I think the big thing about it is that you want support through this journey from people who love and understand a little bit about what you're going through. And that starts with having a conversation about it. I recognize there's no easy way to do that. I think one of the things that it kind of implies that you have to understand it first. And if you've never heard of one of these diagnoses and then you have to educate people on them, people kind of assume that you're the expert in the diagnosis, or, and I said that you are the expert, but I mean in terms of you probably get peppered with questions about symptoms and treatment. So you need to first understand what the heck this even means for you, and then you have to be able to share that with people. And then sometimes, I don't know if you find this, but it's shared with me that other people think they're the expert. Like, oh, are you sure it's MSA? Because my dad had Parkinson's and he actually looks a lot like her. Or did you ask the doctor about Alzheimer's disease? Did you get a brain scan? Because I think it's really important to get a brain scan. You're like, whoa, I'm the one who's going through all of this. Like, let's take a step back here. I think one of the things that I want to acknowledge too is that what makes this challenging is that every time you tell somebody, it's a reminder of the reality of this. And I don't share these things to sound like a downer. I share them to normalize it, I hope, for you. And I think a lot of people are also hesitant to share the diagnosis and sometimes can shy away socially because of this, out of the fear of being looked at differently, of being pitied, of how people are going to react to you. And so it's a lot easier to kind of just become isolated because of that, because it's a lot, if I don't want people to look at me differently, well, then I'm just not going to tell them they don't have to see me. So I just want to normalize all that and just also recognize there's no right or wrong way to tell people. How you do that is your prerogative based on your dynamics in those relationships, as well as your own communication styles that you've always had throughout your life. Does that all make sense so far? Is that like yes? Is that no? Are you picking out what I'm throwing down? Yeah? Okay. So why share the diagnosis? I think a really big thing is it allows you to be in charge of the information that people have about you. Since a lot of people don't know these diseases, and I even find this in the Parkinson's world where most people have at least heard of Parkinson's, if you don't tell someone, a lot of times people will make assumptions about what's going on. They'll think that it's things that it's not, or they'll think that it's things that you're in control of, that you could be changing. They might not want to talk to you about it, and you don't want people talking to each other about stuff. And so it's really where you get to say, this is what's going on with me right now, so you don't have to assume anything. And I think that can be really empowering too. Owning this identity for yourself, for your partner of I am this person, this is what I have now, and I am, I'm living my truth with this. That is something that you're in control of, and I think that that's really powerful. With these diseases, there's so much, you've heard it today, there's so much that you can lose your sense of control of, but how and when you tell who is something that you're in control of. And I think it's really important to recognize that and kind of like hold on to that sense of control when you can. And I think that the more and more you tell people, the more and more normal it can become, the easier it can become to feel like this is integrated into you. And it just, not only for them, it normalizes it for them, like this is a real thing and let me tell you what's going on, but for yourself, you're like, okay, I got this. I am the expert in this. And just recognizing that this is part of the journey too. If you're gonna live with something for a number of years, you're going to have to come up against sharing it with somebody at some point, and that's okay. Do people feel like they agree with these things or not so much? Yeah? Or you're still thinking about it? So then what do you tell people? This is a question that comes up a lot in my support groups, in my clinic. I think a big thing to remember is that you have to first feel comfortable with the information for yourself to be able to share it. And like I said, it's so complicated and you become an expert in it, but you also at least need little nuggets to understand for yourself to be able to share that with people. You don't feel like you have to give a Dr. Golby or Dr. Sklarov talk necessarily on everything that is this disease unless that's where that person is. But I think what I say is come up with your little spiel. Like, what information do you want to share with someone and why? And are you going to adapt that depending on who you're sharing it with? Because a conversation with your child might look a lot different from a friend or a neighbor or a care provider or whoever. So little spiel. This is what I kind of came up with based on what is shared with me. And so again, recognizing everyone is very different and adapting it for what works for you. But I think a big thing that's helpful to share is that it's called an atypical Parkinsonism or Parkinson's plus disorder because there's a lot of overlap with Parkinson's, but it is different from Parkinson's. But at the same time, you're going to see the same doctors who see Parkinson's. There's a lot of similar symptoms. There's a lot of similar treatments that come up. And I think that's really helpful for people because they're like, oh, she said the word Parkinson's. I know that one. I think you don't have to necessarily feel like you need to go into the numbers that you've heard of with the progression rates and stuff like that. A lot of times people can get really caught up on that, and that's really scary for people. But saying that this is a chronic thing, it is a progressive thing, but at the same time, every person is so different. Seeing people, in my profession, I've seen people progress from a few years to 15 years, everywhere in between. And so this is your own unique journey, and I think that's a message that you can feel comfortable in sharing with people too. And then explaining just a little bit about your symptoms so that it normalizes it for them. So like, think of the main things for you. So if you're wondering why I'm slurring my words a little bit, or if my eyes don't open as much as they did, or the reason that I'm using this cane, it's because it impacts my talking and my walking, or whichever sort of couple main things that you feel is important to share. I think a lot of times people jump to, well, is there a cure? And just because there isn't a cure, that doesn't mean, a lot of times people will think if there's no cure, that means there's nothing that you can do. But so that could be something you share too. There's no cure, but there's a lot of different ways to treat these symptoms as they arise so that I can keep supporting quality of life. And if you're comfortable with it, depending on the dynamic with that relationship, of saying my biggest challenge is, but here's how I've adapted to it. Here's how we're figuring it out. Because I want you to keep reminding yourself of that too. While there's challenges in all of this, you've somehow figured them out and adapted to them. And I think that's an important strength for you to make sure that people around you know. You can tell people, if you want, it's okay to still laugh and have a good time with me or with him or her. Just because there's this thing that's going on that is hard for us, sometimes sad, or things are changing, still a person. Treat me that way. I still want to have a good time with you. And if these are people who are important to you, tell them that. You're an important part of my journey, and here's how you can support me through this experience. So you're in control of who you want to tell and why and when. You have to first emotionally feel ready for that, and that's going to mean different things for different people. I do have to point out that people shared with me that sometimes there's a downside in waiting. One is because of that assumption thing that I mentioned in the beginning, that people probably notice that things are changing and they don't want to ask you about it because they don't want to make you feel bad. And so that can be a downside, is that they're, kind of putting it out there of this is something that's going on. You're not making this up in your head. And sometimes, while this is about you, we have to recognize, and I know this personally too, people can feel hurt if they find out something way after the fact. I say personally because one time my dad went to the hospital and he had kind of an emergent thing happen. I had no idea because he didn't want to tell me. He lives in a different state. He didn't want to tell me because he didn't want to upset me or have me worry. And then I found out way after the fact, and I wanted to have been there for him through that. And I hear that come up with these diseases too, like, oh, you're only telling me now when you got diagnosed 6 months ago. I could have been there for you through all of this and supported you. So if you're newer on this journey, thinking about starting with key people in your life. You don't have to feel like you need to shout this from the rooftops or send out a memo to everybody that you know, but if you do that, that's fine, because I've known people who've sent out email blasts to everybody, but at least starting with who are the 1 to 5 people who really need to have this information first. And then how do you want to tell them? Individually, in person, on the phone, an email blast. I know people who sent out letters, or I know some people, and Jocelyn is one of them, I think she shared, of having a family meeting, sitting the kids down and saying, here's what's going on, and let's all talk about this openly. And I think this is a really good point too, where you could have a conversation between the person with the diagnosis and your care partner to say, how do we want to approach this and navigate it together? And are we going to have any cues with each other where if this gets too hard for me, can you jump in and help me? Or here's what I want to share, and here's the part that I want you to share. And I think that's especially important with these particular diagnoses, because sometimes voices get lost. Sometimes cognitively, it's hard to get the words out. And so it could be really helpful if the person with the diagnosis is sharing it and then they just can't anymore for whatever reason, given a little tap, some kind of cue that this is care partner, this is where I need you to jump in now. If you've shared this with people, you've probably seen a variety of different reactions. Sometimes there's too many questions, and that can be really overwhelming, getting peppered with all the questions, especially when you don't have all the answers. Because with these diseases, especially if the doctors and researchers are still trying to figure out the answers, then you don't feel like you have all the answers, and then it's hard for you to answer all of the questions. And then you also see sometimes people reacting with denial or questioning it, like I had mentioned before, if they think they're the expert. Sometimes I also see, and I just want to acknowledge, too much positivity. I think that can be really hard for people. And I don't say that in a way that you shouldn't be positive, but I say it if you're trying to have a tough conversation and you're trying to be real, or emotions come up or whatever, and you're saying like, look, this is what I'm going through, it's really tough, and here's how you could help me. And they go, but they'll probably find a cure in the next few years, and maybe there's these treatments that you can try, and the doctors must be wrong, and you got this, it's okay. And sometimes people share with me that they just want people to be okay with something not being okay. Does that make sense? And I think that's something that you can share with them too. Like, we need this balance right now between positivity and reality when it comes to these diseases. This came up in our support group yesterday, that sometimes people will shy away Sometimes friends are not sure how to react. It makes them uncomfortable, and you kind of just see people dropping off, and then at the same time, you see some people just coming out of the woodwork. And I think it's okay to recognize both of them and to know how to respond to both of them. If there's the people who are shying away, you could reach out to them saying, hey, I haven't seen you since we told you about this, or since we last got together and you saw that things have changed. What's going on? We could really use you in our lives right now. And do you have questions? Do you want to share anything with us? Sometimes people don't know what to say. Sometimes when people don't know what to say, they say, I'm sorry, which is a really well-meaning thing for people to share, but it can also sometimes be dismissive of the experience that you're going through. So I think it's okay to acknowledge that in these conversations. Like if you share this and someone just has no idea how to react, you can say, it's okay to not know what to say. This is a lot to process. And you can think about it and come back to me later with questions. Sometimes there is nothing to say. And then I think human nature is that we all want to help. We all want to fix stuff, right? So but sometimes that can come off at like you don't know how to respond. So when people go, let me know if there's anything I can do to help, and you're like, okay, what does that mean? So I think that's also a really good way to think about like how can I respond to that? Like surprise those people and be like, oh great, you want to help? So when you're at, you could do this thing. I would love to go get a margarita tomorrow night. Can you sit with him while I do that? Or, oh, you're going to Harris Teeter. We just ran out of some milk. Or I haven't had a chance to mow my lawn. I would love if your kid could do that. I mean, whatever it is, think of like actual tangible things that when people say, let me know if I can help, then you can actually share that with them. If that's your relationship with them, if you're comfortable with it. And the reason I bring that up too is what comes up in my support groups are people saying, yeah, but I don't want to put anyone out. But think about it, if it's the opposite scenario and you said to someone, let me know how I can help, and then they said to you, sure, here's how you can help, would you ever be like, darn it, I didn't think that they were gonna take me up on that offer. Now I feel burdened by it. So people, take people at their word with that. And also recognizing if people try to fix things, that you can say to them, like, I really appreciate how much you're trying to help and wanting to fix this. I want to fix this too. But unfortunately, we can't fix it. We can only adapt to it. So again, normalizing things, I hope for you. It's okay for you to feel hesitant to tell people. It is a profound thing. That can be really overwhelming, and just to tell yourself that is okay. It's also okay to feel vulnerable. I think we all like to think of ourselves as these really strong, independent people that are never weak, but we're also all human. And it's okay to share that with someone. I'm having a difficult time right now. I'm feeling really emotional about this right now. This thing is kind of poopy that I'm going through. And be there with me through this. Hold my hand through this. I'm feeling vulnerable, because everybody's felt vulnerable with something at some point. That's what makes us human. People will have questions, like I said. So I just want to say that it's okay for you to not feel like you have all the answers, and for you to tell them that. It's also okay if you say, I'm getting a little overwhelmed by this. I just wanted to share this news with you. Can we save the questions for a different time? I don't really want to talk about this a whole lot right now. And then if they still keep asking questions, or if you don't feel like you have all the answers or want to share them, getting these kinds of resources that are out there on the table that you get at your support groups and your neurology offices that have some of those answers, direct these people to those resources. Here's a great website where you can learn more about CBD or MSA. here's a piece of paper something I've printed out, and you can take it home and read it, and then we can have more of a conversation later. It's also okay to get tired talking about it. And I want to acknowledge that, because with these diseases, with anything that's chronic, sometimes you can feel like your life revolves around it, for both the person with it, and the care partner or the family. Sometimes you just don't want to talk about PSP that day. Like, let's have a Thursday, PSP free day. And to share that with people, I just don't really want to talk about it right now. And here's the flip side of that, though, that I hear, is sometimes you want to talk about it more. Sometimes I see in families, everyone's trying to be real positive and pretend like that elephant is not in the room, and so I'm just going to ignore it and not talk about it. And it's okay for you to say, you haven't really acknowledged that I'm going through this, or I see you've been looking at me a little bit differently, but you haven't asked why. It's okay to talk about this. When it comes to communication, I cannot stress this enough. This goes for care partners and people with the diagnoses. You are your own advocate, and you're also your partner's advocate through this. This is how you get to express your needs and wishes. I don't know about everybody else in this room, but I haven't met anyone yet who can read minds. I like to think my husband could read mine. He still can't after 11 years. So that is how you get to advocate for yourself. Here's something that's been working for me. Here's something that's not working for me. Something about this situation needs to shift a little bit. Let's talk through that. And not letting your voice get lost. This is particularly for the people with the diagnoses. I mean, literally and figuratively with this one, I know that this can impact your vocal quality. I know this can impact your communication because of word finding or difficulty getting your thoughts to talk to your mouth, to come out of your mouth. And so it's a lot easier for people with these diagnoses to just get quieter and quieter, or for people who are around you to talk about you or to your partner instead of to the person with the diagnosis. But I think that, being your own advocate means reminding people that they can still talk to you. They might just have to modify a little bit how they talk to you. Be more patient with me, because I will get my thought out after a while, but it's going to take me longer than it used to. Or if I'm struggling with a word, help me think of that word by describe the word, or asking people not to finish sentences for you. Have you all ever experienced that, where if you're struggling to get out a thought and then the other person's like, blah, 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 that's what you were going to say, and you're like, that's not what I was going to say. Let me finish. But I think that's a way you can advocate for yourself as well. And ask to be treated with dignity and respect. I know that sounds kind of common sense, and it's really hard to ask someone to treat you with dignity and respect, and you don't have to use those words necessarily, but here's what I mean by that. This is my soapbox. We live in a very ableist and ageist society, where when we see someone who might have gray hair, might have a walker, walking a little different, a little slower, people will go, "Hello, honey, how are you today? Do you remember me?" Do you all know what I'm talking about? We talk louder, we talk slower, we talk to older people and people who have physical or cognitive disabilities like people talk to my 16-year-old son. It's infantilization is actually what it's called. And so I think that is also a good way for you to advocate for yourself or your partner to say, you can talk to me normally. I am not 4 years old. An example that I usually share is one of my Parkinson's support group care partners one time shared that she was in a restaurant with her husband. Her husband has Parkinson's, and he cognitively, he's pretty good, but he has this really severe lean over to one side, and he uses a walker, and they're in a restaurant, and the waiter turns to her and goes, "What would he like to drink?" And she was like, "Why don't you ask him? I don't know what he wants to drink." And so it just, I mean, that was just such a small little ageist and ableist microaggression that she was able to advocate on his behalf about. Like, he still has a voice. Let's not let that get lost. Sorry, that was my soapbox. I'm getting off of it now. And then also, I want to recognize that sometimes it is harder for people with these diseases to communicate. But that's where you can share with people, here's when you can talk to me, and here's when you can talk to my care partner. Or having a conversation with your care partner about, here's when I would like you to jump in. Again, going back to that little cue of, I'm struggling with this, you can answer this. Like, when I have phone calls with patients and care partners, I'll often say, I'm going to ask the question to the patient, but if you want your care partner to jump in, please feel free. But I always want to start with them because they're the patient. And then again, thinking of ways that people can help you. I think you can even go home and make a list of that if it would help you, to give you tangible things, again, as a way to advocate for yourself. There is no time like the present, as that trite saying goes sometimes, but it's true, to have some of these harder conversations that I think a lot of us, including myself, like to try to avoid. I do not like when my parents, or I didn't before I came into this career, when they would talk to me about how they don't want to be attached to machines, and when my dad would share with me how he wants to be cremated and sprinkled on the beach, and I'd be like, I don't want to hear it, I don't want to talk about it, it makes me sad, I can't, done. But now I see the value in having those conversations, as hard as they are, having them now, having them early, having them while you can, so that hard stuff is not left unsaid. There's no questions of what would he have wanted. Or even going beyond that, going into messages you want to share with your family. Think ways that you would like to be remembered. How do you want to shape your legacy? And that's part of those conversations as well. It's a way for people to get on the same page, make decisions together with all parties involved. Because that way everyone who can be involved is involved. And then I know that Lauren Ashley Smith talked about this too, but I can't give a talk without talking about this or just stressing it again because it's so important. Healthcare Advanced Directives is a perfect example of having these tough conversations. Again, because if something were to happen, there's no what would he have wanted kind of questions that come up because everyone will have had that conversation. This is not something that you can easily do in any kind of moment of crisis because there's a lot of emotions and a lot of doctors being like, I need you to tell me now what you want to do. And you're like, wow, we never had this conversation. I can't tell you how many people come into our clinic, we talk to them about this, they take the paperwork and they go, okay, I'm going to go think it over, look it over, and then we see them, 3-6 months later, and they're like, oh yeah, I've been meaning to get to that. I mean, I know that life comes up, time gets away from you, but, that's, do it now, and then you don't have to think about it again. These are tools for you to be able to express your healthcare wishes to your family and your care providers so that can give you a real sense of dignity and control over something that is scary. So just because I have these conversations a lot, I'll bring up healthcare power of attorney and people go like, I have a power of attorney. My son knows what to do with our finances. So I have to always educate a little bit on this. Healthcare power of attorney, different from financial durable power of attorney. Durable financial power of attorney, at least in North Carolina, you got to do with a lawyer, some kind of legal service. Healthcare power of attorney, You do not necessarily have to. You can just do it with your family. You get it witnessed and notarized. You put copies on file with your healthcare providers. You keep a copy in a safe place in your house, not in a safety deposit box. Echo, 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 because so many of my patients put it in a safety deposit box. You know how hard it is to get to Wells Fargo on like a Sunday at 11 when you need that paperwork, because it always happens, not during banking hours. So leave it in your house in a place where someone knows where it is. Huh? Your freezer. A healthcare power of attorney popsicle in your freezer. I feel like there's a play in words, a power of pops. I'm going to think about it. I'm going to get back to you. But yes, freezer. Someplace in your house where you can grab it if you need to, or tell someone else that it's there. A healthcare power of attorney is where you get to designate somebody or multiple people to make healthcare decisions on your behalf if you're not able to. And when I say if you're not able to, well, this could be dementia, coma, that kind of thing. A lot of times we tend to see it if someone is exhausted in the hospital, or there's some kind of confusion going on and they just can't get those thoughts out, then that's when the doctors can turn to this person. Pick a person who you know will respect your particular healthcare beliefs. And then a living will, again, education, because I bring this up and people go, I have a will. My daughter knows that she's going to get my favorite antique lamp or whatever. Living will is different from a will and testament. Living will is a guide for the healthcare power of attorney to know what you would want or not want in different situations. They go hand in hand. Like I said, you don't have to use a lawyer. These are available online. UNC has a version. You don't have to be a UNC patient to use it. It's just the one we use at the hospital. Literally, if you were to Google UNC Advanced Directives, it should be the first thing that pops up. It's a PDF. Another one I really like is called 5 Wishes. This is available in, I believe, 42 different states, including North Carolina. It's 5wishes.org. And 5 Wishes is a legal healthcare power of attorney and living will, but it goes beyond this sort of black and white, like, do you want life-sustaining treatment or not, to go into your more psychosocial, spiritual, emotional wishes that you have. It says things like, I wish to be massaged with warm oils at the time of my passing. Now, if you do not want to be massaged with warm oils, although that sounds lovely, you literally cross it out. It says, put an X through anything you do not want. I want these poems read to me. I want this music playing. Here's how I want my family to remember me. Here's what I want to be said at a memorial service. Here is what I want you to do with my body. And I think it gives you space for 3 different healthcare powers of attorney: primary, secondary, tertiary. So that's another good one too. Oh, I even put the websites up here. I'm so smart. I didn't even remember I did that. I'm so smart. And then I also have to go beyond that just to also say that it's really helpful for anyone with anybody, but also especially if you have a chronic progressive diagnosis, to understand what resuscitation and other life-sustaining treatments can actually look like for you, of your age and your health status. Again, this goes for everybody, and I want everyone in this room to do healthcare directives. You don't have to have MSA or PSP or whatever to do it, because none of us know what can happen. But when it comes to things like resuscitation, what most of us know is what we see in the movies and TV shows, like Grey's Anatomy, like this young guy who was on a bike and they're like, clear, and then he's like, I'm awake, I'm alive, what just happened? And I think it's really good, in order to make informed decisions about your healthcare, to have that conversation with your healthcare provider. Like, if something were to happen to me and I needed one of these treatments, what would that look like for me? And then that way you could say, okay, that's something I do want, that's something I don't want. And a MOST form, which stands for Medical Order for Scope of Treatment, has a DNR, do not resuscitate, included in it, where you say I do or don't want resuscitation, but it goes beyond it to say I do or do not want IV, feeding tube, breathing tube, things like that that a DNR just doesn't cover. So I really just recommend, getting educated about these things so you can make informed decisions. And then these are things, unlike a living will, healthcare power of attorney, you have to have placed prominently in your house. It looks lovely framed next to your family portrait. Most people put it on the fridge or front door next to your bed, but that way if something were to happen and EMS gets called in, even if you're a DNR and you have that in a drawer and EMS gets called in, they're going to do resuscitation. They have to. If you're at a grocery store and you don't have your DNR with you, you have to. So if you want these things to be legally respected by healthcare clinicians, they have to be on file at the hospital with your doctors and with you prominently. I know I just got into a lot of nitty-gritty logistical stuff, and again, I guess that's another soapbox, sorry about that. But I think these are really important tools to have these important conversations with the people in your lives. Adapting to communication challenges. We can't talk about communication without acknowledging that there are these communication challenges, and we're going to have a panel later, a multidisciplinary panel that one of our speech therapists is going to be on. She could really talk to you more about this. I had to sort of boil it all down into one slide, but I wanted to share that when you have important conversations, limit distractions, reduce background noise. That sounds common sense, but it's also really easy to be driving in the car, you got NPR on, and then you go, you know what, let's talk about brain donation right now. Or you're having breakfast, the coffee machine's going, your dog is barking, whatever. Set aside a specific time to have these conversations where you're both present in that moment, looking at each other. And it's really important to look at each other so that you can read each other's emotions and make sure you're both focused on that conversation. The speaker in this circumstance is the person with the diagnosis. Taking a big breath before you speak, because these diseases can impact your posture and your breath support. And if you really want to speak loud or clearly, big breath, keep it to a short sentence. You could do lots of little short sentences, but it's because you all might know sometimes the more and more people talk, the easier it is to kind of lose that voice and cognition along it. And then a lot of this is just about exaggerating. If you tell this to people with Parkinson's all the time, they'll think that they're yelling at you when they're actually just talking like this. They think that they're talking in this voice. You might think you're talking in this voice. As a listener, that's not what we're hearing. So pretend to yell at me. Pretend that I am across the room so that I can exaggerate and enunciate really well. And then for the listener, in this case, the care partner, sometimes it's helpful to ask yes or no questions and clarifying questions if there's something that person shared that you're not fully understanding and you want to make sure that you're on the same page. And again, for care partners especially, being aware of finishing each other's sentences. It's so easy to do if someone is struggling with a thought just to put in what you think that they're saying, but try to check in with yourself with that. All of this really just boils down to the importance of open and honest communication. Again, I recognize that this is easier said than done. I am fully aware that everyone has different communication styles, different dynamics in your relationship, probably long-standing ones that aren't going to change anytime soon, even though you have one of these diagnoses involved. But I think it's a really good opportunity to check in with yourself about, are we having these conversations? Am I communicating this stuff effectively? Are there things we can modify a little bit so that we are able to have an open, honest dialogue? Because you want to be able to be on the same page with your partner, with your support network, about the experience that you're going through, about your care needs as a care partner and person with the diseases. the future, how you want to tackle this together as partners. And you can only do that unless you can read each other's minds. You can only do that through this open and honest communication. Just remind yourself, you don't have to tackle this alone. This is an opportunity. And this doesn't have to be one conversation. It should be an ongoing dialogue through this journey. And when it comes to communication, I just have to point out that this is your story. That's part of this, is your legacy, your journey. You are forming a story, all of you, as you go down this road with these diagnoses, and you can help to shape that. So just checking in with yourself every once in a while to recognize the skills that you brought to this experience, the skills that you may have gained through this experience, your strengths, the lessons that you've learned, things that you've discovered gratitude for, or gifts that this has given you. And be able to share that out loud with yourself, with your partner, because it's really easy to get caught up in all the bad stuff. But you can not like something, but also find gratitude and hope and joy at the same time. And I think it's really important and empowering to verbalize that. So just reminding yourself once in a while that you've faced these challenges, you've faced these changes, but somehow everyone sitting in this room has figured it out so far. You've adapted. You're resilient. You are doing the best that you can with this, and tell yourself that. Tell your partner that. I know you are having a hard time, but you are doing the best you can, because you all can just help to shape that story and this journey and what it's going to look like for all of you. So like this little diagram shows, let's do it right now. Give yourself a little pat on the back. Good job, you. You're figuring it out. And thank you all so very much. This is for you. I don't know what the timing looks like, if we have time for a couple minutes for questions or not. Does anyone know our timing? Oh, so we have 10 minutes. Okay. So I would love to take questions from you, but I also, if you want to take these 10 minutes to, share things with each other about what I shared, like what worked for you, what hasn't worked for you, things that you resonated with, things that you don't.
Do you have a handouts?
They should have, I think everything was printed out on the tables. And if there's not enough, I see some on this table. If there's not enough, I'm sure if you ask Jacqueline or one of the staff.
I just wanted to say that when you were talking about advanced directives, and if you're not sure what those end-of-life measures look like, you can ask your doctor. Sometimes saving the time with your doctor when that time is so limited anyways. A lot of insurances and a lot of practices have a nurse line, and the nurses on the nurse line will take the time to talk to you about what all of that looks like, and they can walk you through those things. So you can sit in the comfort of your home and get the answers to your questions and not use up the time with your primary care. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned the discussion about how to tell people, and I just wanted to share what I thought was very helpful for me. Right in the beginning, when my husband had PSP and passed away in January of 2018. When we first started on the journey, I used communication techniques that I had done before. I would always put out an annual holiday letter. And then I'm very proficient, as some people here know, with email. And so I started to include what was going on with Harvey from the very beginning. And as we went for different diagnostic tests, I would take our close friends and family along with me by communicating what was going on. it was, I think, a huge help because none of our friends or family shied away. They were there on the whole journey. So I would just encourage people to
You
do
normalized
something.
it right from the beginning. That's wonderful. I mean, that's true advocacy. And that ended up working out well for you within your support network, it sounds like. Did anyone else do anything similar? I see the question, but to Judy in terms of just sharing it with people in sort of the broad way? Yeah?
Here's a
We do the same
question.
with our holiday letter, and I also, every couple of months, will, we've got about 50 people on an email list that, we also share in our holiday letter, and every couple of months, I send an email out to 50 pretty close friends and acquaintances, letting them know what's going on with Pat. The other thing that I've experienced, 'cause Pat's having some difficulty now in communicating, so in fact, one of my difficulties is finishing her sentences, so I'm going to work on it. When people ask me, they'll say, you know, something's not right, something's not the same with Pat. What's going on? And I'll explain it to them, and every one of them will say, gee, thank you for sharing that with me and for including me in your confidence. People really appreciate knowing what's going on, so they know how to relate to her.
Yeah. That's great. Thank you. I saw a question over here.
Jessica, I had a question, and it has to do with the living will. I'm not sure if it's too technical, but if you can give some guidance on this, it would be useful. In Lauren's handout, it says if a patient has a living will that states the patient wishes to be DNR but does not have an appropriately filled out state-sponsored form that is co-signed by a physician, EMS will attempt resuscitation. Do you know how that works in North Carolina?
So is Lauren in here? No, I'm not sure if this is what she was referring to, but something that makes me think of is that, because I've seen this, when you fill out a living will, there's a few questions around, I mean, I forget how it exactly words it, but things like, you know, if I were in a coma and doctors did not think that I would wake up from it, I would or would not, like check here, I would or would not want to be on life support. And I've seen a lot of people who will check in the living will that they don't want to be on life support, but then they don't have a DNR. And so if something were to happen and EMS were to come in and this is in your house or in a grocery store or whatever, you're in a car accident, and they were to come in and someone whips out a living will saying they don't want to be on life support or, you know, no resuscitation, the EMS is still going to do it because you don't have that pink, is it pink or yellow? Yellow DNR. So you really, if you feel strongly about life support sustaining measures, you need to have the medical orders to back it up too, because the living will more tends to come into play after things have happened, when doctors and families are trying to make decisions about what do we do now. Whereas these are more for in medical crises, for lack of a better word. Did that answer your question? Okay. It might be a better question for Lauren if we can hunt her down somewhere too.
I had 2 points I wanted to make. Number one, about the consent for autopsy for brain donation. Keep in mind, I just wanted to emphasize how important it is to do that during life, because it makes things so much easier at the time, as you've mentioned. Also, it does not place the person under any obligation. So if the family changes their mind afterwards, or if the person themselves decides to change their mind, the paperwork having been completed does not prevent that. You can't consent, nobody can consent, much less compel, that an autopsy be performed when the person is still alive. I mean, the consent cannot be given when the person is still alive. It can only be consented by the next of kin after the person has passed. Okay, that's number one. Number two, about keeping documents in a freezer. Household freezers are not fireproof. They're made of plastic, and it tends to be flammable plastic. And even if it's not, there's going to be this soft plastic accordion-like gasket around the edge, and the fire will melt that in a second. So I strongly suggest getting a document safe. You can get one for less than $50. And, you know, it's a light thing. It's not going to prevent a thief from running off with it, but at least it'll protect against fire.
It's also a good reason to have multiple copies, just in case you can't find it or something were to happen to it. You know, if you have one in your house, but you forget where you put it, or there's a fire, let's hope there's no fires. But then if your neighbor has one, your local child has one, or it's already on file at the hospital, you know, better safe than sorry with that too. Other questions for each other, or for me, or for, yeah, Jerry.
Just back on the fireproof issue, I know someone who put their DNR on the back of the door that the EMS people would be coming through, and they would never see it. So think hard about where you position it. I also wanted to say that in terms of describing the disease, it didn't have to do with any of these conditions, but rather any illness, to draw a picture of it, and so as to describe it to yourself and to be able to convey it to others. And in my case, it turned out to be a graph of the last 5 years of my condition, and it didn't go. This was what was most interesting. It didn't go like off a cliff from health to horrible. It was a series of steps and the progressions within those steps. And that was encouraging to me because I realized I had gotten well, if not better, at various points along the way.
That is such a good point. I think it's so easy to get caught up in all of the hard and all of the changes that sometimes it's really helpful to step back and look at the bigger picture. And if you need a visual to do that, or to talk through it with your care team or with your partner, to say, here's what it's looked like over the past 5 years, and I'm going to surprise myself. I've done really well in X, Y, and Z areas, or it hasn't gone as fast as I thought that it did, or where were our low points and how did we get out of that? That could be a really uplifting activity to do. Thank you for sharing that.
Does your professional organization have a checklist of everything that's recommended?
Of everything that's recommended in terms of what?
Living wills and living power of attorney and things like that.
Good question. I mean, nothing really specific that I'm aware of, and not really through like the social work organization, but a lot of time, there are a lot of really good tools online. I can't remember them right now, but if, like there's some good, oh my gosh, I was just in a training about this a few weeks ago. There's some really good websites that help really outline all of these different tools. But I also think a really good person to talk to about some of these, a little bit about these, but more about the legal documentation, is an elder law attorney. A lot of times people will turn to their family attorney they've used for other things, but elder law attorneys, actually I think we have one here today. I think Walker Lamb's here, and I think they're elder law attorneys. We've worked with a number of my patients, but those are the ones that can say, okay, you have a chronic progressive disorder and you're trying to think about long-term care planning, here's all the paperwork that you need to have in order.
The other question I have is, how old are you?
Age is not a number. It is. Let's see, someone asked if I was 15, so let's go with, I'm 16 and a half. I'm 32 and I'm proud of it, all right, people? Own your age. Oh, did I say year-old? Oh my goodness. He's very mature for being a toddler. You know what? They're the same thing sometimes, right? Toddler, teenager, yeah, 16-month-old. I woke up at 5:45 to be here, so I'm sorry. Thanks, Julie. Thank you so much, everybody. I will see you again. I'm on the panel this afternoon, but I hope that it sounds like you're going to have a good lunch now, and I hope that you all can take this opportunity to connect with one another as well.